In 2005, the state of Utah did something that nobody had really tried at scale. They started giving homeless people homes. No requirements, no sobriety test, no job interview, just keys. 10 years later, Utah announced that it had reduced chronic homelessness by 91%. NPR covered it, 60 Minutes sent a crew, The Washington Post called it surprisingly simple. The Bush Institute published a long write-up. TED invited the man who ran it to speak on stage. The world called it a miracle. But years later, when the state's own auditors went back and checked the numbers, they found something unusual. The 91% was not a count of people who had moved off the street. It was something else entirely. Today, California has spent $24 billion on a model built on that number. New York City shelters hold over 83,000 people on any given night. And Utah itself, the state where the miracle was born, just recorded the highest levels of homelessness in its history. The streets, by every measure, are not getting better. By the early 2000s, America was tired of homelessness. Decades of programs hadn't moved the needle. The shelters were full. The streets were full. Every morning, the same people were sleeping in the same doorways. Then a New York psychologist named Sam Tsemberis proposed something different. Most homeless programs at the time worked like a ladder. First you get sober, then you get into a shelter, then you do counseling, then maybe if you climb every rung you get an apartment. The apartment was the reward at the top. Tsemberis flipped the ladder, give people the apartment first. It is not the reward, it is the foundation. Once someone has a door they can lock, everything else, sobriety, treatment, work, becomes possible. He called it housing first. Then a man named Lloyd Pendleton, who led Utah's homeless task force, ran the numbers. He found that renting someone an apartment with a caseworker was cheaper than leaving them cycling through emergency rooms and jails. So Utah decided to try it, and this is what surprised everyone. Utah is one of the most conservative states in America, heavily Mormon, skeptical of government welfare, the last place anyone expected to run a Just Give Them Homes program. But Utah did, quietly, from 2005 to 2015. Then came the announcement. Chronic homelessness, people homeless for over a year, often with a disability, had fallen 91%. NPR covered it, 60 Minutes featured it. The Bush Institute published it as a model. Other states followed. California passed billion-dollar bond measures. New York launched its own programs. Seattle, Portland, Chicago, everyone adopted what they called the Utah model. And that is the version most people still know. Utah figured it out. Housing first works, just scale it up. That has been the gold standard story for a decade. When Utah announced its 91% reduction, here is what people pictured. A line on a graph going down. Thousands of people who used to be homeless no longer homeless. Streets that used to have people sleeping on them now empty. That is what the headline meant in the public mind. That is what 60 Minutes showed. That is what every advocacy presentation put on slide 1. And the way most people received that number was simple. 91% is enormous. That is almost everyone. If one state can do that, the problem is solvable. That is what made the story so powerful, the hope inside that number. But here is where the story starts to crack. Years later, Utah's own state auditors went back and looked at how that 91% was counted. And what they found was not fraud, it was a definition. The 91% applied only to one category, chronic homelessness. That meant people homeless for over a year with a disability. And during those 10 years, the rules for who counted as chronic were adjusted. The minimum length of homelessness required changed. The kinds of disabilities that qualified changed. The ways someone could be removed from the chronic category changed. Same person, same situation, same shelter line, but under the new rules they were no longer chronically homeless. They were a different category, they were no longer on this graph. They did not move off the street, they moved off the spreadsheet. The state auditor's report used the word erroneously. Utah erroneously showed a 91% decrease. The Department of Workforce Services stopped using the number entirely. So what does it mean to say chronic homelessness fell 91%? Did those people get homes, or did they get reclassified? And here is the other question. During that same decade, what happened to Utah's total homeless count, the bigger number that includes everyone? Did that fall 91%? No, it barely moved. Think of it like a doctor who tells a patient he will reduce their weight by 91%. A month later, the doctor announces success, but the patient looks the same. The scale reads the same. What changed is that weight was redefined to mean only the fat in one small area. Everything else moved to a different field on the chart. The number is real. The number is also a measurement of a shrinking definition, not a measurement of fewer people on the street. The chart improved, the hallway did not. In 2015, Utah's story did not just appear, it exploded. NPR ran extended segments. 60 Minutes sent a crew. The Bush Institute published a major piece. Mother Jones on the left covered it. National Review on the right covered it. A small state's policy report became, almost overnight, the most cited example of solving homelessness in America. And the way most people read that is reasonable. Good news travels. A success story this big should be everywhere. Big result, big coverage, nothing unusual. But look at the year. 2015 was not a calm year for the homelessness conversation. It was the loudest year of an argument that had been building for a decade. On the left, advocates were arguing that homelessness was an emergency, that housing first needed massive federal funding. On the right, fiscal conservatives were arguing that government programs had failed for 40 years, that personal responsibility was the answer. Both sides needed evidence, both sides were running out of patience. And then this story arrived. A conservative state with a religious culture skeptical of welfare ran a progressive coded policy, give people homes, no conditions, and got a 91% result. Look at what that single sentence does. The left got proof housing first works, even in a red state. The right got proof smart, locally managed government can solve hard problems without Washington. Both sides could carry this story to a press conference and use it. Both sides did. And here is what did not happen when both sides love the same story. Nobody pressure tested the data. Nobody asked the boring question, did the underlying definition change? Because asking that question would have spoiled the news for everyone. So what happens to a number when everyone wants it to be true? What do you call a story that arrives exactly when everyone needs it to arrive? Think of two friends in an exhausting argument. Neither will back down, both are sure they are right. Both are tired, then a third person walks in and says, I have the answer, it proves you are both right. Nobody asks that third person to show their work. Why would they? They got the result they wanted. A number that satisfies both sides of an argument is the safest number in the world. It can sit on a shelf for years before anyone tests it, because nobody has any reason to. Until they do. By 2018, the Utah model was not just a story, it was a business plan. California passed bond measures totaling billions. Proposition HHH alone was $1.2 billion for LA, then came more propositions, more bonds. Over the past 5 years, California spent $24 billion on homelessness programs. New York launched its own large-scale initiatives. Seattle did, Portland did. And around all that money, a system grew, nonprofits dedicated to running these programs, consultants who advised cities on implementation, developers who specialized in supportive housing, training programs, conferences, reports, awards. A whole layer of professional, full-time work, built on the premise that this approach worked. And the way most people read all of this is hopeful. Smart people are working on it, real money is flowing, big states are committed. Activity equals progress. But look at the streets. California spent $24 billion in 5 years. Homelessness increased by 30,000 people during that period, reaching over 181,000. Los Angeles County alone counts over 72,000 on any given night. New York City shelters hold 83,000 people as of last month. Utah itself, the state where the miracle was born, recorded its highest levels of homelessness ever in 2025, an 18% jump in a single year. Chronic homelessness there went from 906 to over 1,200. So you would think if a model is not working over 20 years and tens of billions of dollars, the model would change. But it has not. Why? Look at who would have to admit it is not working. Every nonprofit whose mission is built on this approach would have to rewrite itself. Every consultant whose career rests on it would have to find a new specialty. Every state agency that staked its reputation on this would have to face a public reckoning. An industry that admits its premise was wrong is an industry that loses its funding. So the premise gets defended, the data gets reinterpreted, we need more time, we need more money, the implementation was imperfect, always more time, always more money. When did the solution stop being the goal? When did the story of the solution become the goal? Picture a small restaurant that goes viral for one recipe. Other restaurants, bigger ones, start serving it. They invest in the equipment, they train the staff, they print it on banners. Years later, someone quietly admits the original recipe used a substitute ingredient. It never tasted the way the reviews said. But by now, 50 restaurants serve the dish. Their kitchens are designed around it, their reputations rest on it, so they keep serving it. They tell each other it just needs more practice. The dish does not taste right, but too many people are in the business of serving it. Utah's 91% was the original recipe. The 50 restaurants are the cities and nonprofits and consultants who built their kitchens around it. And the streets, the actual streets, are still hungry. Here is how the textbooks tell it. In 2005, Utah gave homeless people homes. 10 years later, chronic homelessness was down 91%. Other states copied the model. The problem was solvable after all. But here is what we actually saw. The 91% was not a count of people who left the street. It was the result of a definition that got smaller. The story arrived at the exact moment both sides of an argument needed it, and nobody had any reason to check the math. And once the story scaled, it stopped being something we could test. It became something we had to defend because too many people had built their work on it being true. Now step back, look at all 3 episodes together. In 1981, the country emptied its mental hospitals and called it freedom. The buildings closed, the people went to the street. In 1994, the country's most famous city swept its sidewalks and called it law and order. The streets got photographed, the people got hidden. In 2005, a quiet state changed a definition and called it a solution. The chart improved, the streets did not. 3 different decades, 3 different administrations, both parties, 3 different words: reform, public safety, solution. One pattern: the buildings change, the neighborhoods change, the vocabulary changes, the people on the sidewalk are roughly the same. And right now, all 3 words are being used at the same time. Some politicians are calling for new reforms to mental health institutions, using the word that closed them in 1981. Some cities are passing public safety ordinances against sleeping outside, using the word that swept New York in 1994. Some states are funding new solutions modeled on Utah, using the word that built an industry on a number that did not mean what it said. All 3 at once, the same 3 words this country has used for 45 years. So when you hear those words next time, reform, public safety, solution, there are really only 2 ways to read them. Either we are finally, after 45 years, doing the work for real. Or these are simply the 3 words America rotates between while the people on the sidewalks stay the same. Watch the buildings, watch the streets, watch the numbers, especially watch what gets quietly redefined. That is how you will know which one it is.